Hello, everybody, and welcome to Over the Rainbow, an LGBTQ podcast dedicated to queer education and queer representation. I'm your host, Rachel Keighley, and I use she, her pronouns. Today's guest is Reuben Thomas. Reuben uses he, him pronouns. He works at a charity as a community support officer, and let me tell you, the work he does there with the LGBTQ youth and adult groups, as well as outreach in schools educating on identity, is absolutely amazing. I've had the absolute pleasure of working alongside him in our local LGBTQ youth groups, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a nicer, more genuine person. We will share some of the fantastic work he does and how important these LGBTQ spaces are in future episodes, so please stay tuned. But in today's episode, Reuben and I delve into the conversation around gender identity, exploring how the cisgender standards within society excludes trans individuals and contributes to inequality. We also talk about an alternative way to approach individuals who are ill-informed on gender identity, and Reuben shares some fantastic tools he has used to spark conversation and motivate people to learn that gender is not binary. I hope you love this episode as much as we loved recording it and will help join the fight for trans inclusivity in your own lives. So, let's get on with the show. Hello, Reuben. Welcome to Over the Rainbow. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks, Rachel. I'm pleased to be here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Bit tired, went on a run this morning, but my mind's ready, so that's fine. That's good.
Good.
Cool. So yeah, thank you for doing this. Before we launch into the good stuff, well, actually, this is good stuff as well, but I want to ask you what you've done this week, either to engage in queer activism or queer education. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Oh, I'll put you on the spot, Rachel. I'll let you go.
All right. Okay, so this starts a bit mundane, but the other day I had to ring my bank, very adult-like, because I needed to add my partner to make it a joint account, and because of COVID, etc., you can't do that online right now. So I rang, and the lady that answered said, "Oh, what can I do for you?" And I said, "Oh, please could I add my partner to my joint account? Like, how do I go about doing this?" And she replied saying, "Oh, you'll have to get your husband or your boyfriend to come into the bank and fill out a form." And I was just like, oh, like awkward moment in my mind where I was like, oh God, like she's just assumed I'm straight here. What do I do? And I was like, no, it's not my husband or boyfriend. So I'm going to say it. I was like, oh, well, actually it's my girlfriend that'll be coming in. Is that okay? When can we come in, etc.? And immediately she was so apologetic. She was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to assume. And it was fine. Like, I wasn't offended, but it really made me think how there are so many instances in my day-to-day life where it's always assumed that I'm in a heterosexual relationship. And then it's almost having to make that decision as to whether I, A, just say, yeah, and go along with it, or B, be like, actually, no, I'm not in a heterosexual relationship. It's my girlfriend or my partner, which is why I use the word partner, because I want to be inclusive for everyone. So it was just a really interesting example. And I hope, at least with her now, every time she comes across this situation again in the future, she'll think twice about assuming the gender of a person's partner. So I'm hoping it's helped her just by me just opening the conversation up and saying, actually, it's not my husband or my boyfriend, it is my girlfriend. So yeah, hopefully that's one person who will think about the many kinds of relationships that we can have.
Amazing.
Thank you. What about you?
Do you know what? I've actually thought of one in the minute that you were talking there.
Nice.
This is probably a bit TMI for some people, but I actually went for my first smear test this week, and it was obviously a really nerve-wracking experience being a man, going for a procedure like that, but it was actually ended up being really positive. So I went to the receptionist and I put on my phone, typed it into a note saying, "Can I book a smear test, please?" and just held it up at the window. And she was super discreet about it, super supportive. And she said, "Did you have a letter?" And I said, "No, I got one years ago when I turned 25 and I ignored it." And she went, "Didn't get around to it, let's say." And she just kind of understood what a big deal it was. And then when I went in as well, the nurse was just absolutely lovely. She treated me like a man who just happened to be there for a smear test, and she got how, without me having to say, she got how big a deal it was, and she sort of told me that she was really proud of me and that she was really sort of supportive of me coming to do it because it was such a huge deal. And I sort of said to her, have you had any training on this, because you're really good at it? And she said no. And I was like, wow, I mean, it kind of shows people that you've got no excuse if she can be that great without any training. But also I was like, there is such a gap here, isn't there? And I'm really, really lucky that I had a really positive experience with my practice, because even though they've not had training, they're all just kind of good people and they're all just on board with it. But I know there are so many people that wouldn't have that same experience. So it just sort of really made me think, okay, how can we support those people who are doing that frontline work and who are going to come into contact with this, and what can we really do to raise awareness? And I guess a really good first step is coming on something like this.
Yeah. Oh, that was amazing. Yeah. And I mean, not only is it a good reflection on how they all reacted at the doctor's surgery and were like completely prepared and inclusive, but it's also an important point to say that it's not just women who need smear tests, just like it's not just women who will go through menopause or periods, etc. Like, we need to stop pigeonholing all these life processes into one person. Well, whatever the word would be. Yeah. No, thank you. That was a great example. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, this week's episode is on gender identity. So we're going to be looking at what it means to be transgender for those who have never heard of it, if there are people, the support that is out there for people who are coming out or discovering things and more about their gender identity. But also I want to discuss the challenges and barriers that one may experience because we live in a cisgender society that thinks that the binary is fixed as male, female, there's no in between, there's no crossing over, etc. So yeah, thank you for joining me in this conversation today. So if we start with the very basics, for those who are just figuring it out or don't know what it means and have never come across the term before, what does transgender mean?
Okay, so transgender actually comes from a Latin root. Trans means to cross over. And now that you know that, you'll see it loads in the wild. There are loads and loads of words that have the prefix trans, and it doesn't mean anything fancy, medical, magical, something sort of weird and strange. It is literally just a descriptor of a gender. So to be transgender means to not identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth, quite simply. It is a sort of massive umbrella term. Everybody has different experiences of it. Some people might identify with the label, some people might not. But ultimately, it is just that sort of descriptor of somebody's experience with gender. So the converse word is cisgender. And again, that comes from that same Latin root, trans meaning to cross over, cis meaning on the same side. So again, you'll see that in the world as well. And I think a lot of people get really confused about those words and what they mean. And we see a lot of discourse around, don't call me cis. Cis is a slur. It's a word that you're putting on me. And it's like, well, you put the word trans on me. It's just sort of, we both have genders. We both have different experiences of those genders. These are adjectives that describe what that experience might look like in a very broad term. But quite simply, some people grow up and think, yep, what the doctor said at birth was right. I have got those body parts and I do feel that way. And some people grow up and go, no, my body says one thing, but my brain says another. And some people don't even see it that way at all. Like, their body is not the wrong body, it's the perfect body for them. But the things that it's telling society are perhaps different than what they would tell society if they had the choice, which is a really weird, convoluted way of describing it. But yeah, it's just words, man.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes a lot of sense, especially the thing you said at the end in terms of what society puts on you, because to me, in my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, gender is socially constructed behaviours and activities that we
absolutely
are supposed to fit into. So if we're going back to ye old age, and obviously these roots are still there, but like the man did certain masculine things and he went out to work and he did this and that, and then the women were supposed to stay at home and they had their roles, and you don't cross over, but it is all completely socially constructed, and then it's imposed on us, and we're just supposed to say, yeah, that's fine, like not going to question that and continue on with our lives within those roles.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we already see how gender has so many different connotations in different cultures and in different time periods. It's not this fixed thing. I mean, the whole idea of like pink for girls and blue for boys, like that's only in the last 100 years or so. Like pink used to be seen as a masculine color because it was stronger and blue was calmer. So our ideas as a society about gender change over time and change depending on the culture that we're in and the geographical area that we're in. So there is no one rule about it. And I think it's really exciting that in the West, we are starting to sort of open up to that a little bit more and recognize that it doesn't have to be so fixed. And yeah, I think the younger generation are really kind of championing that and bringing that forward, which is a really amazing time to be a part of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just seeing everything that the waves people are making, or at least the conversations they're starting to have, demanding that people do look at things such as gender differently to the way we have done. And it will take time, and it does take a lot of patience with people who either don't want to see it or are pushing back against it because they don't want to accept it. But it's great that we are still having these conversations. They need to be had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think these conversations are one of the most important things we can do, because particularly, like you say, people sort of pushing against it. If we start to go, okay, well, why is that? Why do you believe that? And they say, well, science says this. And I go, that's really interesting, because actually science also says this. And they say, well, religion says this. And I say, that's really interesting, because religion also says this. Or linguistics says this. Yeah, but linguistics also says this. And I think it's everything we say sort of can be backed up, has some evidence base, and that's true on both sides, I guess. Sides, I don't want to make this sound like a debate, because it's not, but like for people who have different opinions about anything, this is not sort of specific to gender or to sexuality or anything, but just in any conversation there's two sides to any interaction, and obviously we can always sort of give a basis to our beliefs and give some evidence to it, but if we can also sort of understand that other side's evidence as well and have an open conversation and meet in the middle, that's where you find some really exciting stuff that can kind of change the way you think about some things. So yeah, I think learning little facts about, like, okay, well, what is the origin of, why do we use pink for girls, and what is the origin of the word trans or cis, and what is the origin of women staying at home with the kids and men going out to work, all those things. Let's really sort of delve into the history, the science, the religion, the culture, the linguistics. It's all such juicy, interesting stuff. So yeah, thanks for setting this up, because that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Oh, exactly. You're welcome. And it's not something we can cover in one episode. It's like the conversation is ongoing for forever, really. You can talk about so many different aspects. Yeah, but it is, like you said, understanding the other person's, again, like it's trying to use the correct terminology, but we'll go with point of view just for ease of understanding. You do need to understand why they have the beliefs they have in order to respectfully challenge and change the beliefs they have. Because yeah, the fundamental bottom line is that it's non-negotiable that gender is not just male and female binary that can never be crossed. Like, it's so fluid, it's so flexible. But people who hold those views, we need to understand why they do, to then be able to engage and challenge. Because if we're coming to the table demanding that they listen to us, but we're not giving them the respect of listening to them and understanding them, then they're going to get their backs up immediately. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do. I appreciate that. Like, it's not an easy thing to do, to have to listen to someone say why you are wrong, especially when it's something so personal such as your sexuality or your gender. But yeah, we do need to engage in the appropriate ways in order to create the change.
Absolutely. I think I'm probably diverting here and covering things that you wanted to talk about later, but I'm on a roll. But yeah, I think that's where it's so important that we have sort of the right people who can be advocates. So being able to do things like this and have a conversation in a safe space with sort of safe people, that can then extend beyond that and start conversations outside of this sphere. And also like having sort of support services and organizations whose job it is to challenge that stuff, so it doesn't always fall on the individuals themselves. But just knowing that as an individual you have power, and if you can engage in those conversations when you can, think about sort of how you can do that and how you can keep yourself safe, but how you can sort of create opportunities for other people to learn as well. And it is actually really fun sometimes. And I think I do a lot of sort of engaging with people that don't necessarily agree. And I think I surprise people a lot, because people expect me to be like, oh well, trans is this and you've got to support it, and actually I go, oh no, that's really interesting, I completely see where you're coming from, yeah, I totally understand why you have that point of view. I think the person in your life who you're sort of talking about might be feeling this way, but yeah, I can understand your feelings, and your feelings are valid too. And they're kind of sitting there like, well, I wasn't expecting to be validated, I was expecting to be argued with. And it's kind of, I suppose, a bit of a more flies with honey approach, but I think we all have the power to do that to some extent, and that's kind of what I would really like people to sort of take away and think, oh yeah, well, I feel a little bit more confident now, I feel a bit empowered to start those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, if you also think about it, and it is such a tricky one, but if you do think about it, within our parents and definitely our grandparents' lifetimes, either this stuff wasn't spoken about, there wasn't the language to put to it, or certain aspects were seen as completely illegal. So like gay sex, for example, was illegal till I want to say the 1960s. Should have fact checked before I said that, but let's say the 1960s. So people,
sounds close enough.
Yeah, people growing up as children being told this is illegal, you have no sphere of reference. And now obviously we know it's not. We're learning more and more about identity, and it's not just identity related things as well. We're learning more about the world. But you do have to give people that little bit of space to reset what has been sort of hardwired into their brain from birth. And so it is about not coming in and blaming that person for the society that they've been brought up in, because it's not their fault that they've been indoctrinated in that way. I mean, they have some responsibility to challenge it, particularly in society now, and to reflect and teach themselves. But that very basis that they learn from is something we need to be patient with.
Absolutely. It kind of all comes down to kindness, doesn't it? I mean, I know it's such a sort of juvenile thing to say, but that thing that we probably all got taught when we were kids, treat other people how you want to be treated. And if we can't have conversations with people who disagree with us with kindness and with understanding and with empathy, how can we ever expect them to have those conversations with us? So yeah, just kind of meeting people where they are, and being able to support other people and show them that, okay, even if you don't support me, I'm still going to support you, because that's the kind of person I am, and that's what I want for society. That's yeah, I'm all utopian again, aren't I? But
no, it's brilliant, it's amazing. So sort of moving on from that, I mean, that's sort of one of the things that I'm going to ask you a question, and we've already discussed one of the challenges, if you like, but I want to ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges that trans people face, both in coming out and in their individual journeys transitioning, if this is something they want to do? Of course, not everyone wants to medically transition or legally change documents, etc. But what are some of these big challenges that we face, both personally and that society sort of impose on us?
I mean, it's such a huge question, because obviously everybody's completely individual. Everybody's, I hate the word journey, but I suppose it does kind of sum it up quite well. But everybody's experience is completely different. So there is kind of no universal one size fits all approach to kind of looking at this. And it's kind of, I suppose it's almost like, how long is a piece of string? Like what barriers and challenges do people have? Well, trans people are people, so they're gonna have the same kind of barriers and challenges. But there is that bit extra that, I mean, you mentioned at the start, we live in such a cisnormative society, and even little things like like with your sort of story that you mentioned about being on the phone to the bank and having that assumption about the gender of your partner, as a trans person, you are going to face those assumptions every day, all day. You're going to face those sort of microaggressions and simple things like being on the phone to your bank. If they ask for Mr. Thomas and I say, yeah, I'm Mr. Thomas, but my voice doesn't sound like I'm a Mr. Thomas, then they're going to challenge that. And I, to some extent, I understand why they have to because of security and everything, but also it's about that sort of unlearning process that a lot of people still have to do. And because we're not there yet, us people who are just living, we have to kind of bear the brunt of all that learning. We have to be that tool that helps people kind of figure things out. And it's not fair and it sucks. And a lot of people have a really difficult experience in sort of being misgendered day in, day out, having to sort of educate people when they're literally just going about their daily life. I talk to a lot of young people who sort of talk about how much of an issue school is and that they are expected to educate the teachers most of the time because the teachers just don't get it. So I think it just, all of that kind of adds up to being a bit of an extra weight. And it's just kind of exhausting, I think is probably the best word. That, I mean, like you mentioned in your bank story, like it just kind of made me chuckle because life admin is so difficult anyway. Like, particularly at the minute, we're all dealing with COVID, we're all sort of extra sort of stressed and exhausted, and a lot of us feel like we've got no time. And when you add life admin into that, it's like, ugh, when am I even going to get the time to do this? When am I going to get the brain cells and the energy? But then if you are also trans, that life admin becomes so much harder, and the amount of it that you have to do gets like tripled because you don't, I mean, particularly for people like non-binary people, you don't even exist legally. How can you sort of figure out all your documents and everything when you're not even recognized as a person? And it's just, yeah, so many sort of arduous processes that you have to go through. I mean, we've seen that with the consultation on the Gender Recognition Act this year that is absolutely rubbish, for want of a better word. It was described through the report consistently as dehumanizing, because it's just the bureaucracy of that process and the utter lack of empathy that goes along with it. And trans people have sort of passionately responded to that consultation in their hundreds of thousands of people, and an overwhelming percentage of people who responded, not only trans people but allies, were in favour of sort of reforming it. And the government has gone, no, we'll put it online, we'll reduce the fee, that'll solve some of the problems. And when you're sort of already dealing with day in, day out, all that sort of microaggression and that oppression, something like that happens. And it's just that sort of kick in the teeth to go, okay, well, we're still this minoritized group in society. We're still kind of not listened to, not supported. And when you log onto Twitter and find that everybody just hates you and your whole existence is just being debated, like it's like, excuse me, I'm here. Like you can't debate whether transgender is a real thing or not, because, well, what about the hundreds of thousands of people who just already exist?
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, none of that was actually coherent. That was a big long ramble of ugh. But just I think one of the biggest things is just we're fine, we're okay. Like, it's not this huge, well, I mean, obviously that doesn't go for everybody, not everybody's okay, but the simple fact of being trans in itself is not an issue. Like, there's this whole idea, like in schools, that if a kid comes out as trans, it's a safeguarding issue and they have to go and tell their parents. But the being trans itself is not a problem. It's not a mental health issue. It's not even a medical issue. There is nothing wrong with being trans. It is just a characteristic of who you are. The problem comes from what everybody else puts onto us, and that is the reason why a lot of trans people struggle with their mental health, and why there are some sort of horrendous statistics about suicide and about homelessness, about lack of inclusion, lack of acceptance. All that stuff is not coming from the person themselves. It's coming from everything that is sort of absorbed by that person, and that is just tiring. So I think that's, yeah, like I said, there's so many different things that feed into that, but I think it kind of all comes under that same heading of just fucking let me exist, bro. Like, that's all I'm trying to do.
Exactly. It's like, you did not create, I mean, when I say you, I don't mean you personally, I mean like trans people did not create these barriers and challenges for shits and giggles. They didn't wake up one day and say, oh, today I want to try and be this, and then like, let's mix up the societal pot and like worry all those white cis heterosexual men that are in power because they won't know what to do. Like, no, it is just the fact that like society seems to think that gender exists in two boxes that don't overlap, cannot be crossed between, there's no in between, and it is society and attitudes that are the barriers and the problems. Like you said, if people just it's unfathomable to me. I can't even verbalize like how much I don't understand it, because I try and I'm like, but like, no one's turning around to me and questioning my cisgendered femaleness, because why would they? It's what I say I am, and it's what I feel, and that's not questioned. It's like, why is it questioned that you're male when you are male? Like, I cannot understand it.
Yeah, like so many people sort of question it so much and place so much sort of like quantifiableness on it, and they're like, well, why? How do you know you're a man? And if I turn that back on someone who's cis and I say, well, how do you know? They're like, well, I just am. And it's, and actually, as trans people, we have to kind of become experts in so many different fields in sociology and all sorts, and we have to be so introspective and look at our own gender so much, when that's something cis people don't often do, but somehow we're the ones that should be questioned on it, because like cis people who've never ever thought about their gender, they're taken to be an expert in their own gender just because it happens to align with what somebody else said about their gender. But most of us spend years and years and years thinking about this before we ever even tell anyone, let alone act on it or do anything. And like you said, not everybody even does act on it. It's, for some people, it's something that they know but they don't need to express to anyone else. And the fact that people feel like they have a right to disagree with that, to question that, I mean, the audacity, the arrogance there in thinking, well, I know my gender but you couldn't possibly know yours.
Yeah.
And I mean when that intersects as well with people who are younger or people who have autism or anything like that, the amount of sort of what's the opposite of empowerment? Dispowerment, is that a word?
But it is now.
The amount of dispowerment that comes from that, and sort of people thinking, well, I have some right to take away your autonomy because you couldn't possibly know, because this thing doesn't fit into my little box of normality. And it's just, yeah, I think obviously, like I said, everybody faces different things, and if you don't even know if you're going to have a roof over your head that night or where your next meal is going to come from, obviously things like that get pushed to the back and you're focusing on the things that need to be thought about. But for somebody like me who's pretty privileged, in a relatively easy living situation, and I have got the support of my family and friends, and I've never had to face massive challenges in relation to my identity, that biggest thing is just society.
Yeah, I know. And the real, I mean, I'm just using a lot of like dramatic language, but it is dramatic. But the thing that really gets my goat is that like, what does it even matter anyway? Like, honestly, the fact that like one person's male, one person's female, one person is non-binary, how is that gonna make society crumble? It's not. I mean, it is. If we're getting really strict, it's going to make the patriarchy crumble, which is obviously the thing that the cis white heterosexual man does not want. But in terms of everyone else, if you are not, I mean, okay, maybe I'm going to start offending people here, but if you're not the cis white heterosexual man at the top of the totem pole, you especially have no excuse, because what effect is it going to have on your life if people are trans or not, or non-binary or not? Like, absolutely nothing. It's not going to change your day-to-day life in any way whatsoever, other than that you've got a bigger and greater understanding of identity.
Absolutely. I mean, I always try and talk to people about equality in terms of, I mean, this is not my quote, don't take it from me, I don't know where it came from, because somebody a while ago said, oh, that's really good, I'm going to use that, and I was like, it wasn't me, I'm not that clever. But it doesn't mean taking away someone's seat at the table, it means adding more seats. So if you as a person are being told, well, you're privileged, and you're thinking, I don't feel privileged, that's totally valid, that's okay. Like, that's not what privilege means. So if we're having a conversation about cis het white men, and there are cis het white men out there thinking, well, I got laid off this year and I can't put food on the table for my kids, and you're trying to tell me that I'm privileged, that's not what we're saying. We recognize how difficult that situation is. What we're saying is that your skin color isn't making it harder, your gender isn't making it harder, your sexuality isn't making it harder. So it's about sort of, again, approaching this whole topic with empathy and saying, look, we want to help you as well, we want to fight for your rights, why don't you kind of come and hold our hand and fight for our rights as well? Because what we want is for everybody to have those same opportunities, everybody to be sitting at that table together. And at the minute, the only people around that table are the cis het white middle class able-bodied men. So come on, women, come on, black people, come on, Polish people, come on, disabled people, come on, homeless people, come on, everyone, and let's just like dismantle that table, build a new one where everyone can sit. Like, it just, yeah, I'm with you. I don't understand why people don't think that way, but I do. Like, I do. I can put myself outside of my brain and I can have conversations and I can empathize, but when I'm sort of talking in this sphere, I'm just like, it's so simple.
Yeah, I know. Stop making it so complicated. I know. Oh.
And can I just say as well, I love that your strong language it really gets my goat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was gonna go more extreme, and then I was like, no, let's be respectful. Not so respectful to goats, but there you go. Yeah, no, exactly. So that's like the umbrella challenge, if you like. But one thing that you mentioned in a conversation with me the other day, and I really want you to talk about it some more because it is so interesting, is that, or rather you'd said that your mum was annoyed by this, was that people constantly get gender and sexuality mixed up. Is that what you said?
Yes, yeah. Bless. There's a lot of people who are sort of trying really hard, and they just don't know. And I think the conversation came from my mum was saying that somebody that she works with was filling out a trial form for something just to test if it worked, and under the field gender they'd put asexual, and mum was just like, oh, I can't even with you anymore. And I'm like, okay, mum, chill, because you are like really militant about this stuff, because obviously it's close to her heart. But to me that shows that that person is trying, because they get the whole LGBTQIA. There are different terms under that, there are different people with different experiences, and they were trying to be inclusive by saying, oh, I recognize that the gender might not be male or female, it might be one of these other words, but the word they used was a word for sexuality rather than a word for gender. And when that's sort of coming from a place of just, I haven't learned it yet, nobody's taught it to me, and I don't know any better, but I'm really willing to learn, then that's absolutely fine, there's no issue with that. And I really don't want people to sort of go away from something like this thinking, oh, well, I just won't say anything then, because no, that's the opposite of what we want.
Completely, yeah.
I think people need to feel confident to test things out and to make mistakes, but then also to kind of learn from those mistakes. And I think the issue comes when people are kind of making a bit of a choice to stay ignorant, and they're offered all these opportunities to learn more, and they just go, oh well, it's too much to think about, oh there's LGBTXYZ, or there's too many letters now. And a lot of people really just do conflate the two and don't understand how they might be different, how they might intersect. And there's so much around, like, just it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about that exhaustion. It just, all that sort of misunderstanding and that myth and that stereotype just adds to that layer of exhaustion that we have, and to that sort of educating that we have to do for other people. Because I've had people say, oh well, I came out as gay at school, and I was told that I can't be gay because I'm trans. I've got to pick one or the other. And it's not just in terms of gender and sexuality. People just don't get intersectionality at all. I've had people say that, people say I can't be gay because I'm disabled. Like, what? Completely different things, but okay. But yeah, people either seem to think that gender is sexuality, or that gender automatically impacts on sexuality. And to an extent, I can understand where that comes from, because the way we talk about sexuality is so gendered. Like, we don't say I'm brown hair sexual, or I'm blue eyes sexual, or I'm tall people sexual. We say I'm hetero, or I'm homo, or I'm bisexual. And obviously others. But the way that we kind of approach the whole topic is based on, okay, what's in your pants? What do I want to sleep with? That's the way I'm thinking about it. And trans people kind of mess with that, because the labels that we use to talk about sexuality might need to change. And I have so many conversations where people are like, oh well, this kid was a lesbian, but now they want to be a boy, so now are they a gay man? And I'm like, well, has their orientation changed? Who do they want relationships with? And they're like, oh no, they still want relationships with girls. And I'm like, well, then they're straight. And they're like, oh, but they were gay. And I'm like, well, because they haven't changed who they are and what they want, but the words that we use to talk about it has changed, because the words that we use to talk about their gender have changed. And I get why it's such a sort of big thing to wrap your head around, but I think what I would say to most people is, you don't have to wrap your head around it. You don't have to understand everybody else's experience. You just have to not be a dick, and not challenge people when they tell you that that's what their experience is. So if somebody says that they're gay and trans, cool, they're gay and trans. If somebody says that they're trans and straight, cool, they're trans and straight. If somebody says that they're agender and asexual, cool, all of those things are valid. Like, just listen to people and respect them.
Yeah, completely. It shows how, like, I don't know, first of all, how limiting our language is, that we don't yet have the words or the vocabulary to describe the way we're feeling, the way we are. But also, it shows how, like, sometimes language is obviously very, 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 very useful, but also very dangerous in these instances, because other people are demanding that you explain yourself, and it's very invasive. It's like, on what level or planet do you get to have an insight into my sexuality or my gender or what I do with my life? Like, none. I mean, it's not the same, but it is the same. I would never ask you, if you had a partner, like, oh, so, what do you get up to with your partner, like in the bedroom, out the bedroom? Absolutely not. None of my business. But it's like the same sort of thing. Why do we assume that we have to know everything about everyone else's identity? And if their explanation isn't good enough for us, why does that mean that they are invalid because we can't wrap our heads around something that we didn't have, like, a right to ask in the first place?
Absolutely. I mean, I think for me it's kind of similar to the question, where are you from? Where, if where you're from is just 100% Leicester, and you look like you're from Leicester, and nobody's ever challenged that about you, that's a really simple question, and that's the sort of thing that's a sort of icebreaker, small talk kind of thing. And people say, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Leicester. Oh, cool, yeah, I studied in Leicester. But if people perceive you to look like you're from somewhere else, that question becomes a whole other thing, and it's super invasive. And it's that whole, oh, but where are you really from? Oh, well, where are you originally from? Well, where are your parents from? And all that kind of stuff, that it's just, you can just sort of feel yourself dying inside a little bit. I imagine that, like, this is not relevant to this conversation right now, and you have no right to know everything about possibly like 6 generations back in my heritage. The answer is, I'm from Leicester. That's as simple as it should be. But I think it's kind of the same with gender and sexuality. If you're a cis het person who's never really had to think about any of this, and you get asked what your labels are, you can say, oh yeah, I'm a straight woman, and that's fine, because that doesn't feel invasive, because that's the norm, and that's what you're expected to say in that situation, and that's all fine. But if you're anything other than that, that answer becomes less straightforward, and the sort of supplementary questions that people start to ask just multiply. And actually, a lot of the time, we don't even know, like, particularly when, like I said, we have to be so introspective and do so much sort of exploring of gender. And when you start that, it is interesting, and it kind of, it pulls into question everything else, and you start to understand that actually maybe I don't need a label altogether. Maybe it's a bit more fluid. Maybe how I feel can change day to day. And this might be the way that I feel about my gender, but maybe my sexuality is different. Maybe I'm not sure. And that whole thing, it's like, well, I'm not just going to explain that to someone on the street when I can't even come up with a word for it myself.
Right. Yeah.
It's just, yeah. Stop asking people intrusive questions, please.
Exactly. Amen to that. So this is something that I have noticed both growing up and then with my own PhD research, is, and I guess it does sort of link to the whole understanding the difference between gender and sexuality. But what do you have to say on like trans spaces, within the LGBT plus community? Because I feel like, and I'm not going to pigeonhole everyone, it is not everyone, but it isn't just from, so the LGBTQ plus community is seen as one whole cohesive body, and it absolutely is not. And there are many nuances, and there are many sort of differences in opinion and attitudes within all these identities. But for the purposes of this episode, we're talking about trans people. I have seen a lot of pushback from within the LGBTQ plus community for trans people to occupy a space within what should be their community. Why is that? What is that?
Yeah, it's such a sort of complex discussion topic. And I mean, I've had conversations in the past where I've sort of explained how gender and sexuality are 2 very different things, and they don't necessarily need to impact each other. And then people say, well, why do we lump them together then? Why do we sort of, because I think that does contribute to it, the fact that we say the LGBT plus community, people just think it's all one thing. And people say, well, why don't we separate then? And I think that is a huge part of the reason, is that actually the LGBT community have a lot to learn about accepting gender variance, and I'm sure the trans community have a lot to learn about accepting sexuality variance. And for me, kind of the LGBT plus community should be a bit of a example. It's kind of about saying, well, look, we've faced similar barriers and challenges. There are similar people who want to see us not succeed. Instead of us kind of creating our own little factions and fighting with each other, why don't we pull together and show them what it can look like when you do that, and what it can achieve? And let's model equality and diversity and inclusion to the rest of society. So when I see that not happening, it sucks. And I do kind of start to understand that thing of, well, should we have some sort of separate trans safe spaces then? And for me, I think it's such a difficult one, because I want the entire community to be together. And in fact, I don't want the LGBT plus community to exist, because I want society to just be inclusive of everyone. I don't want to see this society where we have to have a specific LGBT community centre, a specific Muslim community centre, a specific Catholic community centre. I want there to be a community centre where everyone can go and be included and feel supported, and where we're not facing these barriers and challenges because of who we are. With all that said, we're not there yet. So that's why we have to have sort of LGBT plus specific support. And we recognise that within the LGBT plus communities, there are so many different people facing so many different things that actually sometimes we need specific support within that as well. And at the minute, some people say that, oh, it's far too trans focused and we're forgetting about the lesbians and we're forgetting about the gay men and it's not fair. And that's absolutely not the intention. But actually, to an extent, that's because it needs to happen. And that's kind of the same argument that people have about something like feminism. And they say, well, but what about the men? And it's like, well, we care about you too, but you're doing all right now. Like, it's the kind of Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter things. Well, yes, your life does matter, but currently your house isn't on fire and Black people's house is on fire. So yes, we recognise that there are still barriers that the LGBT plus community are facing and that they need particular support with. But actually, sometimes the trans communities are facing all of those barriers and more. So what we really need to be doing is pulling together and supporting them more. And where people aren't in line with that and they don't think that trans people belong in the LGBT plus communities, I would kind of say, I think it's you that doesn't belong in the LGBT plus communities, because if you can't love and support and respect all of your siblings, what are you doing here? Like, you can't expect some kind of support and community and not want to offer that to other people.
Exactly.
So just stop fighting, everyone. Let's have a utopia.
Exactly. It's what we're all fighting against anyway, isn't it? If you want to break it down into those specific categories, so gay men or lesbian women wanting their rights, wanting their seat at the table with the people in power, in inverted commas, if you like, then yeah, that's great. You need it. Everyone needs a seat at the table, but we need to stop this climate of fear whereby people think that the trans community or the bisexual community or someone else is pulling them back from having a seat. It's like, no, it's not like if the trans community gets there first, there's no seats left. That's not the case at all. There are seats for everyone, and we need to stop climbing over each other, because then we're really as bad as the people that are already on top with their seats at the table, because we're saying, I'm good enough, look at me, I fit, but these people behind me, they're not, fuck them. And it's like, no, like that's exactly what you're complaining about when through your own marginalized experiences. We need to pull everybody up together.
Absolutely. And I mean, certainly lately we've seen an awful lot of sort of toxic discourse around bullying of women and silencing of women. And I'm not diminishing that at all. Like, obviously we know that happens and that's completely unacceptable, and we should never be bullying or silencing anyone. But a lot of the corners of society that I see this sort of allegation and this discourse coming from is from women, from feminists in inverted commas, and from particular factions of the lesbian communities, which I know do not represent lesbians or women or feminists in the slightest. But this conversation around trans women not being sort of accepted into the club, and trans women can't possibly be lesbians because lesbians don't have penises. But it just strikes me as I don't understand how they don't see the hypocrisy there. They're saying, stop silencing us, stop oppressing us. We are feminist and we deserve to be equal with men and have a seat at the table. But actually, we're going to silence and oppress you trans women and deny you your equal rights. And to me, that it's just, I can't. I'm doing hand gestures, which you can't see because this is a podcast, but I can't verbalize. It's just, they just don't meet in the middle there for me. And I think that's the bit of sort of education that we need to get out to the LGBT plus community as a whole is that thing about, do you know what equality is for everyone? And until we all have it, none of us have it. Like, until our Black trans siblings are safe, until our disabled asexual siblings are safe, like until everyone is safe and has that seat at the table, it doesn't count for anything. Because you as an individual might be sitting in parliament, but if you're not advocating for people who have similar experiences to you, and if you're not advocating for people who have different experiences to you, then what are you doing? Like, that's not achieving anything. You might have pulled yourself up by the bootstraps, but like, that's not contributing anything to the rest of society. And just, yeah, let's just support each other.
Exactly.
It'll be beautiful.
Amen. I love that. Yes. So just to finish with, because I realised we could talk about this for hours and there's so many more issues we definitely haven't touched upon every person's experiences, but are there any, so I like to end with something positive. What support is out there for trans individuals right now? What can they access?
Obviously it's different for everybody. It depends where you live, it depends sort of your age and all the different things, but there are some amazing organizations doing some amazing work. Gendered Intelligence is awesome. It is a sort of trans-led charity supporting young trans people up to the age of, I believe it's 25, and they have a website, Google Gendered Intelligence, and they do sort of youth work, sort of residentials, online support, helpline stuff, and loads of sort of information and awareness raising, which is, you can sort of print things off and just take them to the people in your family who don't accept you, or take them to your workplace or your school or whatever, and just be like, just learn. Similarly, the Gender Identity Research and Education Society, so GIAS, is great for, obviously it says on the tin, research and education, and that sort of awareness raising and training. There are probably loads of other like sort of national ones that I've missed there, but there are some, they are out there, and obviously there will be sort of different local ones as well, so I would urge you to sort of do a bit of googling and find what is in your area. If you're a young person, the Proud Trust is really good for that. They've got a sort of find my local youth group one. I think Stonewall also have a similar system where you can put your postcode in and find some stuff, and there is so much amazing stuff going on online and within the community as well. There are amazing sort of trans, non-binary, gender diverse creators out there, so just go on a bit of a sort of Google rabbit hole, find some people to follow on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and TikTok, and just sort of surround yourself with trans joy and positivity and awesomeness, because believe me, it is out there and it is amazing, and it's not all what the mainstream media likes to portray is this sort of negative narrative. Actually, there's people out there sort of achieving amazing stuff, and I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can have, is that sort of representation and that aspiration to be like, okay, there's these Black trans makeup artists on TikTok who are absolutely crushing it, and I'm going to do that too. I'm going to be like them. So just whatever it is for you that helps you to create your little corner of joy, go find it, because I promise it's there. And we are a lovely, welcoming, wonderful community on the whole that will be very pleased to have you.
Definitely. And finally, a similar question, but it's flipped to allies. How best can allies, so that's cisgendered people, support their trans siblings? What can they do, even if it's a very small thing that would really help?
One of the biggest things, just ask. Like, I know it sounds so simple, but it also sounds really nerve-wracking. Just talk to your loved ones and your friends and see what are the things that they want and what they need, and it might be, I need absolutely nothing, I just need you to continue being my friend, and that is fine. That is being a good ally to the people in your life, and just sort of remembering to check in with pronouns and with language and stuff, and unlearning some of the assumptions that society has taught you. And then when you feel ready, take it a step further, go and be active. I think similar to how we've seen this year with a lot of the sort of Black Lives Matter stuff, it's not enough to post a black square on your Instagram and leave it at that. We need to all kind of be pushing for change. So whether that's signing petitions, whether that's feeding into consultation when things like the Gender Recognition Act reform happens, but whatever that looks like for you, whatever that activism feels like is sort of achievable, you can start small. It can be the tiniest things, but sort of challenging yourself to get outside of your own little bubble, to learn a little bit and to make a difference for some other people. That's the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I feel like I've learned a lot. Hopefully everyone else has learned a lot.
I mean, I don't know, because I tend to just waffle completely. So if you've learned stuff, great. But thank you for having me. It's just been an absolute joy to sit and just rant about gender for an hour. So
yes. And everyone get on the gender ranting train. That's what I would like.
Yes, it is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Seriously, just get some people together in your room and just go, oh, gender, right? It's so much fun.
I would love that. Yeah, amazing. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed today's show. New episodes are available every Wednesday, so please do download, subscribe, and share with everyone you know. If you have any suggestions or feedback, please leave those in a comment or contact the podcast on Instagram. The Instagram handle is @_OverTheRainbowPodcast, or on Facebook @OverTheRainbowPodcast13. Have a great week, and I'll speak to you all soon.